Order. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Bowie. Council President Naker.
Here.
Councilmember Jost. Here. Councilmember Coleman.
Here.
Councilmember Kim.
Here.
Council Vice President Yang.
Here.
Councilmember Johnson.
Here.
Seeing 6 present, 1 absent.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. We have 3 items on our full agenda today. We're going to start with a mid-session legislative update. Excited to welcome Jenna Rourke, our head of intergovernmental relations, to tell us how wildly we're succeeding at the legislature.
Thank you, Council President. Hi, everybody. Jennifer O'Rourke, Director of Government Relations, here on the job 2.5 months, I think. So it's a pleasure to be with you this morning. I think at this point in session, it's super timely to be conversing about what's going on up there. I prepared a slide deck starting with the state legislature. A lot of the focus and what I've prepared for is on that. I ended with a slide on some of the federal goings on and welcome your discussion and such on all of it. So my first slide is really just kind of setting the table, offering up the legislative landscape, where we're at in the process right now. Full screen. Thank you. This Friday is the 3rd deadline, and what that means is bills are supposed to be in an omnibus bill. Committees, their legislative committees, the ones that have a budget or think that they have a budget, will have put together an omnibus bill, maybe an omnibus transportation bill, an omnibus public safety bill, tax and bonding bills. For a lot of those committees, this Friday is a big deadline. And the tax bill and the bonding bill really play by their own rules and won't be out for another couple of weeks. But for a lot of omnibus bills, that deadline is this Friday. We are seeing those coming together. And when those come out, we review those to see if our smaller requests have made it into a bill. There's a whole lot of up in the air what's going on for folks like me who do lobbying or whatever, because on the House side, and jumping right into it, on the Republican side, they have said they don't want to have any omnibus bills and they don't want to spend any money necessarily. On the DFL Democratic side, there is a desire to do some of that. So, we have an omnibus public safety bill out this week that, because it's public safety and whatnot, that one will probably move forward. But on the transportation side of things, I know the Democrats would like to put one together, but House leadership on the Republican side with co-chair John Koznick has said he doesn't intend to have an omnibus bill. So I think what we'll see is some omnibus bills out there. We've been tracking them already, and I think they'll come to a head eventually in the next 2 weeks, and it'll be one of those things that leadership decides when they ultimately are trying to figure out a way how to get through the end of session.
And Ms. O'Rourke, just as context for our priorities or just in general, what is the advantage or disadvantage of having an omnibus bill or not?
Great question. I think of our priorities sort of as like a tier 1 and a tier 2 in terms of what kind of attention they're getting, whether it's a big deal or controversial to other people. And there's a whole lot of things, I think, for local governments across the board that fall into that second tier, just because, we're operating government, whether you're cities or counties, and our stuff isn't always so sexy, right? I'll use...
Some of us might beg to differ, but...
To us it is, but not to everybody else. And I'll use one as an example. And this is really getting into the weeds. There is a bill brought forward that we testified on a number of times, and it has to do with non-fatal shootings and the program that we have in our police department. The county testified on it a number of times. Hennepin and Minneapolis did. The mayor did some lobbying on it in terms of outreach and whatnot. The police chief and others have testified on it. That's a pretty small potatoes for a lot of folks. And that's an example of a bill item that is actually in an omnibus bill right now. It's made it into the omnibus public safety bill on the Senate side, the House side. And we're hoping that gets across the finish line just because there's been good bipartisanship on that. It's statewide. So when it comes to that, we're making sure that we don't get penalized for being good at our jobs. is the East Metro, and making sure that any money that's out there is still something we can apply for, as opposed to the rest of the state just trying to piggyback or replicate the work that's already been done in Ramsey County and the city of St. Paul. Does that answer your question?
Really helpful, thank you.
We have roughly one month left, or 5 weeks. Technically, they need to end on May 18th, which is a Monday. You're all very familiar with the concept of a special session, where it's kind of like going into overtime to complete their work. In an election year, that's really just something that doesn't happen very often, just because there's just so much pressure and they want to get out of there. So we really expect session to be over that week. The budget forecast is something we always pay attention to, just because it dictates whether or not they're able to do more spending or not. Last year was the budget year. This year's supposed to be the bonding year. The governor did put forward a small supplemental bill a few weeks ago, and I think it's possible there will be some spending. Another trick that we've seen, good trick if you will, is they sometimes go back and look for funds that have not been spent yet. This is something they've done for sure in the workforce area, where we have Chair Pinto. That committee was formerly chaired by Commissioner Jay Zhang. So we have some real advocates and partners in that space to work with. But, dollars that haven't been spent there, they might go take another crack at those and try to repurpose that money. The same thing sometimes happens in the housing space. I don't need to remind you, but the legislative majorities in both bodies are, virtually tied and tight. The Senate has the one vote majority with the DFL control, and the House, it is tied, and you just see a lot of day-to-day bickering and a lot of day-to-day positioning on whether it's issues or committee control. You really see that playing out. And a lot of people, crossing their fingers and pledging to go work really hard on elections and try to come back next year with either Republican control or Democratic control, right? And, as somebody that's been in this business for a really long time, I'm always just sort of eyes open on what the other big issues are out there and who's getting what. The Hennepin County sales tax for the hospital and HCMC, I think that's something that will be in play at the end of session. The county modernization, if you've paid attention to what's going on for counties with the federal government and just what's been happening in Minnesota, there's a lot of computer systems that everybody jokes about it, but it goes back to the 80s, and they use terms like Oregon Trail and DOS or DOS systems. It's a really big problem for the counties, and an expensive one too. I think they're ultimately going to get some help in that area this legislative session. The governor's supplemental budget we touched on, and then revenue raisers. I think there's always proposals out there, particularly on both sides, to raise a little money to try to do some things. I put sports betting on there. I don't think that will necessarily happen, but I think it's always important to pay attention to, because it's an area where if they did raise some money, they could put it towards some of the things that we prioritize. We can dive in here on some St. Paul bills that we're either leading on or that we're closely tracking. The first two bullets deal with the River Center complex, one being the sales tax extension on the half-cent sales tax. I'm going to touch on the common cent and the half-cent here, but you all know the difference there. That half-cent sales tax extension goes back to the mid-90s and set the city up for what you all know as the STAR program, but then also was put into place back then for paying off the bonds on the River Center complex. That bill was introduced last year. Senator Pappas brought it forward, so that's why it has a lower number, 2657, and then Representative Hollins has that on the House side. She introduced that this year. We've been working closely with Pappas's office on that. We expect a hearing probably in the next 10 days, I would guess. And that's a good example of something not necessarily having to make deadline. It needs to make sure it meets the tax chair's deadline. The appropriation bonds, as you all know, and the mayor shared with you, that's an ask for the state's contribution on the River Center complex. Perez Vega has been our leader on the House side on that, but it has not been introduced quite yet. Senator Umu Verbatim introduced it last year, Senate File 3113. I would point out that's a good example of the bill was introduced and we're sort of using it as a shell, if you will, for a delete all amendment and to bring that forward too. That did get a hearing last year. Obviously, new administration, different deal with the wild over there and whatnot. So we'd be looking to get a hearing on that as well, but haven't had one yet. The next bullet is the Como Zoo Big Cat exhibit. That will be eligible for the bonding bill, and knock on wood, those guys have been working hard. West 7th utilities, that bill's been introduced, and we are getting a hearing next Tuesday, the 21st, on the House side. I expect we'll get one on the Senate side as well. Senator Pappas, as you know, is the bonding chair and has been a big supporter for the city in this space. This, to point out, Madam Chair, is the utilities underneath the West 7th project, and a lot of you have been involved with that, but a lot of legislative support and just folks that want to step up and be helpful there. The next bullet is, this is a good example of a statewide project where we step up and asked the statewide lead pipes replacement. This is another bonding ask. Pretty big one, but yesterday our general manager of the regional water, she testified in support of this, did a great job. And Sydney Jordan in the House, and then from Duluth, Jen McEwen have been the leaders on this bill. Non-fatal shootings, we kind of touched on that. Representative Frazier and Senator Clark are not East Metro legislators, but introduced this bill and have been good partners for us in this space. We do have a sales tax clarification that we'll be introducing. This is a late introduction because it has to do with the court case from a few weeks ago and seeking clarification on that. The next two, the Como Zoo geothermal and the Heights geothermal, are two projects that, knock on wood, are included in the Senate R&D. It's an energy account, renewable development account. It's a special. You've always heard of general fund dollars. There's an R&D account that is specific for these kinds of projects. There's an omnibus bill where we have both these projects included, at least on the Senate side. And then the final bullet on here, I don't know that this is going, we still have our fingers crossed on this. There was legislation introduced statewide last year that would allow local agencies to be reimbursed better or easier by the Department of Public Safety when it comes to rallies at the governor's mansion or protesting at the Capitol and whatnot. Senator Umu Verbatim got that bill introduced, and then police chief from New Prague named Representative Steer introduced it on the House side. That's something that came forward, I think, from the Carter administration. We've been super supportive of it. We're hoping to get that amended into a bill yet this year. And then I just included a bullet on defense, just because when you're a city like us, you're either sometimes a target, or there's mysterious language that shows up in a bill that is obviously targeted at something the city did. So there's a few of those out there that we're working on. Any questions on this slide?
Yeah, Vice President Yang.
Thank you, Council President. I have a question about the reimbursement to the local agencies. Can you share with us if we currently get any sort of reimbursement from the state at all?
Thank you
for those specific actions, the tests.
I'd be glad to follow up with you, Council Member. I don't have a direct answer on that. I'd want to make sure that we are giving you accurate information. Okay. What our bill does is establishes a new program, and even in reading the bill, I've asked myself, I wonder if we've ever been able to get this. I'm guessing the answer is yes, because of joint mutual aid and joint powers agreements, but for some reason we're seeking it to be more specific.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Bowie.
Thank you, Council President. I just have a question, and excuse me, I'm a little late here, but I was just looking to see if it was covered before, but I'm just curious, was there any conversations or any actions at the state level around creating a cannabis tax or a local cannabis tax? I know there's some cities across Minnesota that like has a cannabis tax, but St. Paul doesn't have one. I know we do zoning, we just pass our zoning laws for it, but I'm just wondering if there's any bills for other cities to actually create one.
Madam Chair, Council Member, I have not seen any, and that's an easy one for me to do some quick research on with the League of Cities or some of our other partners. I would point out there was a local cannabis tax. Cities were given a portion of that. They called it local cannabis aid when they first legalized this a couple years ago, and then they took it away like 2 years later. So our platform actually doesn't speak to a local tax on it, but it speaks to getting back the local cannabis aid, and I just don't think that's going to happen in this kind of legislature.
Thank you.
Seems that anything named local blank aid is just there to be taken away. Is that right? Sorry. Okay.
Yes and no.
It's a hilarious joke. Any other questions before we move on? All right. Thanks, Director.
I wanted to share with you, a few of you have been at the legislature on our behalf already this year, so I want to start out by saying thank you, and also to share with you some different ways the mayor or others have been up there either testifying or working with legislators. On Operation Metro Surge bills, this is a huge priority, and I think is one of our top 5 that we identified with your help in the platform. The mayor's been testified a couple of times in both the House and the Senate. Fingers crossed and whatnot, the bills that seem to have the most energy are ones that would be helping small businesses and maybe setting up a grant program at deed for that. The mayor testified early on speed cameras and allowing local governments to have that. I don't think that is going to be included or make it across the finish line. Council President, you helped us out or helped the city out. We were able to testify on some local control gun bills, and the mayor did as well. That's an important one to be on record with, and I don't know that that's going to make it across the finish line either, but again, an important one to be on record with. And frankly, it's been a good place for us to show up with the city of Minneapolis in that space. We've written numerous letters of support for different projects, whether it be policy or funding. The police chief's been up there testifying on the non-fatal shootings. Assistant Chief Ford testified and did a couple of meetings with us, with even Republican legislators on just Capitol security and the city costs there. I shared with you about General Manager Vasky testifying on lead lines, and just wanted to let you know we're often part of efforts with the League of Minnesota Cities or Metro Cities in terms of work up there. We share a lot of information back and forth and even partner with the counties sometimes on that space, so I wanted you to know that. Meetings with Republicans and Democrats have been occurring on the River Center complex. And that's a chance for us to kind of, weigh in on Operation Metro Surge or put forward some of these other public safety bills. And then, frankly, the last one, just on this slide, is wanted you to know the mayor was out in D.C. a few weeks ago. You may have seen it on your social media, but it was a pretty key time, and it was time well spent. She was able to weigh in with Congresswoman McCollum's office and the senators on some of the CDS, CPF, which stands for Congressionally Directed Spending or Community Project Funding, also known as earmarks. Back in the old days is what they called those.
Ms. Coleman.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this. Could you just talk a little tiny bit more about why speed cameras aren't going anywhere? I get a lot of questions about that, so I think it would be helpful to be able to provide more information.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'd be, so this goes back to like the first week we were in this job at the Capitol. There's legislation a few years ago that created some pilot projects in the city of Minneapolis, the city of Mendota Heights, and then they left room for a county to participate in this. And it was the idea, going back 10 years ago, speed cameras were super frowned upon by a lot of partners. Even the police didn't necessarily want that. I think because they've had a harder time, they have less police than what they used to. That part of the capital community has been more open to it. And I think they've been pretty happy with the results of that pilot over in Minneapolis. So Representative Samantha Sensor-Mura brought forward language this year in a bill to make that statewide. So you would still need the partner of your local police or the county, the county sheriff's office to do that. But I don't think it's likely to become law at the end of the day this year.
Just a quick follow-up on that. Is your sense that has it gotten more controversial than expected? Is it that it's not a top priority for most people? Do you think it has a chance in the near future?
And as a follow-up, do the pilots that some cities have had the advantage to have to end when they don't extend this? So for example, does Minneapolis continue to have red light cameras as an ongoing pilot?
Yeah, Madam Chair and Council Member, that's a great question. I'll start with the last one. Does their pilot or authority end at the end of, I can get an answer to that quite easily. That's a great question. I think sometimes the way it works in the Transportation Committee is if it's not a priority of the chair and that caucus, that they just kind of set it aside or say this isn't the year to do that. Interestingly enough, I was at Ramsey County when this first went through, and we didn't necessarily have the partnership of our local law enforcement to do that. So we were just sort of watching it and a little bit saying, think about us if you're going to involve a county. The state came in at the last minute, like they sometimes do with a bill, and say, oh, there's a cost to it. And I remember talking to Senator Dibble, and it was his decision because it was his bill. And he was like, there isn't enough money to include Ramsey County. So that was our answer at the time. Surprisingly, now there is no cost to it. There's no state cost to this program if it went statewide. So, I'm thinking maybe in the next couple of years we may be able to move this forward. And it's probably a smart policy area for, folks like you to be in that space with community and whatnot. I know speaking to you as always, I was going to say women and a lot of people with small children, but people are driving faster and faster. And I've raised kids that are driving faster and faster, and it's a tricky thing. It's not great. And this is some folks' attempt to quell some of that in neighborhoods and whatnot.
Thank you.
Thanks for the questions and the great answers. I see Ms. Johnson, and then I think Mr. Greenfield might have had something to say. He does not have something to say about that. Okay.
The pilot program will expire, it's in statute in 2029. I have firsthand knowledge of what's included in that statute from a previous life.
Ms. Johnson, and I think we should keep going.
Yeah, I guess it's not even really a question, it's more of a note. I think one of the things that I am really interested in exploring is just ways that this body can be helpful. I think a lot of the work over the next couple of years, and even just the communication between our state delegation and the city and county electeds just are maybe different than how it was in the past, or even just more so because so many of us are actually, speaking on a regular basis. And so I appreciate, just seeing how many people have been to the Capitol. I don't think I've been tapped to do anything since I've been here to actually be beneficial or helpful in that way. And so I'm just more so just saying I think it'd be really interesting to see how and where, for example, the $40 million request that was coming up for emergency rental assistance, that's something that at the state, I was watching and just kind of wondering, how to be helpful, where to tap in. Operation Metro Surge bills that are coming through, I kind of mostly just see them on the, when there's a press conference or something, I'll see the aftermath. And so just really putting that out of I think it's really great that more people are getting out to actually experience testifying on the House floor, on the Senate floor. But there might be ways that council can be tapped in, even if it's not in that direction, or if it's in conversations that we have with our current electeds. Separately, I think the same could be said for DC. I know that the city of Minneapolis does council, they do bring their council leadership to DC for the same purposes. And I think that's in addition to the mayor's work as well. And so just thinking about that as a compliment, I know we have the National League of Cities and the League of Minnesota Cities. I don't necessarily know to what extent we as a body are involved heavily in some of the nationwide conversations, but it's just something to think about in the future and something I think worth mentioning.
Thanks, Chair. Feel free to respond and or keep going.
I'd be just real quick on that. Thank you, council member, for bringing that up. I heard like a couple of different ways for us or you all to plug in better, both like physically up there or participating up there, but also where we show up and how we show up with some of these other associations that frankly we're paying for in a membership with the National League of Cities, Metro Cities, the League of Minnesota Cities. I know some of you have board membership on some of those, and I think there's opportunities to involve others in that space. And once we get through this session, I used to work at the League of Cities, so I know this is how it goes. There's policy committees and whatnot, and I think maybe after session it'd be a great time to look at our platform and see, come up with a few ways that we can push some of our needs in this space, like whether it's cybersecurity or the public safety capital cost bill, like push those into other people's agendas to make sure that we're in a better space or a different space for 2027. And I would just welcome your partnership. We've still got like a third left of this legislative session, and I think there's ways to plug people in still. So thank you.
And let's let you, thank you for the questions and the answer. I also think that involving us more in the discussion about the policy committees at Metro Cities would make us, those of us on the boards of those entities, feel like it's more meaningful
Right.
because we're truly channeling what the city as a whole wants on those bodies. So I love that idea. And to Chair Johnson's question, please do continue to keep us involved during the last third. Having those specific invites to come and testify on a particular bill or write a letter is really helpful.
Okay.
I think we'll let you finish your slides and then hold our questions just to make sure we get through, if that's all right with my colleagues.
Thank you, Council President. We've covered a lot of what's on this slide. I just always like to throw in a miscellaneous slide just to pick up a lot of the pieces. We talked about the Hennepin County proposal a little bit. Let you know about there's always defense or fix-it kind of issues, two that I'm working on this week. Some of our friends are suggesting changes to the copper wire work that the Mayor Carter's administration worked so hard on. So we're trying to be a good partner in that space. I have checked the platform. That was a little note to myself, just in terms of other bonding and policy issues. But, it's no secret, and I know the same thing happened on the other side of the river. There's always the city's priorities, and then there are local bills that our legislators bring forward for things that they'd like to secure state bonding dollars for, too. So knock on wood and everything, I think there'll be a bonding bill this year, even though many times there isn't in this election year. I just feel like with Senator Pappas leaving and leadership in the House, changing a lot, and even Governor Walz, I think there's an appetite for certain people to have some maybe legacy, if you will. And I don't want to jinx anything by saying that. And then I did include on here, we referred to Metro Cities. They have their annual meeting tonight. It's in Roseville. I'll be attending. They have a spot on their board for the government relations position. And then I would just share there is another, Minneapolis and St. Paul also each have a spot on that board. St. Paul doesn't have that spot filled right now, so we should talk about how we fill that, or how you fill that. I want to just touch on quick, legislative retirements, but also legacy opportunities, but then also leadership opportunities. There are a whole slew of retirements happening. I have a PDF that I can share with your offices if that's helpful. But obviously the ones that are most key for the city of St. Paul and whatnot, Senator Pappas leaving is, a big deal. Representative Maria Isa Perez Vega leaving the legislature is a big deal. She's the delegation chair right now. Two names I think you probably know, Representatives Moeller and Sandra Feist are Ramsey County legislators, but have been really key on a lot of our immigration and public safety and domestic violence and crime victims' rights kinds of issues. They'll be sorely missed. And then, I just couldn't not share Senator Rest is the tax chair. She's long time been an urban or core city supporter, really understands things like, TIF and the struggles on redevelopment and whatnot. So she'll be missed next year. But I also wanted to point out, these are opportunities for other legislators to move up, whether it's getting a gavel or finding another committee place. One, I've always noticed that we've, at least in my couple of years working for either the county or the city, we have not had a St. Paul person on the tax committee. And, in terms of growing your own, that's an area that I've had some little side conversations, but I think it's a really great area of growth and important for us to have our people in key places. Representative Meg Lugar-Nicolai, she's on the Transportation Committee, which is just awesome because she's an advocate for our projects. But, up until her getting elected, we didn't have somebody on the Transportation Committee. So I just point those out as examples and another way of showing up and working with using your relationships to help people see other ways they could show up for us. As a city, it's not just about introducing and pushing bills.
Thank you for pointing that out. I wasn't aware of several of those points. Thank you.
Yeah. The same thing applies to the federal level, frankly. And this last slide's really shifting gears, but we referred to the community project funding projects and the term earmarks. That's these 8 that you see on this page. I didn't include dollar amounts, but about a month and a half ago, Representative McCollum opened what we call the portal for the city and other local governments to advance ideas for them to include in appropriations bonds. What's super interesting in this administration, with everything going on with the Trump administration and the slowdown with the actual budget, these projects have been a little bit just held out differently. And, in the 7 years they've been around, both Democrats and Republicans have used this process and have both benefited from it. So it's almost like a safer place to play, if you will, or to move things forward in the federal process. So we put forward 10 projects. McCollum's office advanced 8 of those 10, which is just outstanding. She's only able to advance 20, and if you think about it, she's got Washington County and all of those cities to work with there. So these same projects were sent forward into the Senate, Senators Klobuchar and Smith's offices. We have not heard back on those yet. I want you to know we work super closely with the grants office. That's part of the finance team. They know these projects inside and out, which has been great when it comes to filling out the applications. So that's my way of saying I don't want to go really deep on any of these projects. I'm not the expert, but I'd be glad to follow up if you have more questions.
And that brings us to the question slide. Thank you so much, Director, and especially appreciate your time when it is a very busy time for you and when I know you're doing a ton of good work. I would look to my colleagues to see what questions there are. Ms. Coleman.
I just have a quick question that is maybe a little bit outside of the scope because it's not a St. Paul priority, but I've been lightly following Representative Greenman's legislation that would prevent local governments from entering into NDAs around data centers. I've been seeing that it might not go through. I'm just curious if you have any information you can share about that.
Thank you for the question. And it's a super interesting topic. I haven't attended very many hearings at all on that, letting some of our statewide partners handle more of that. When bills like that pop up, my first go-to is somebody in the city to see, does this affect us? So the city attorney's office and our PED informed me, we don't do NDAs, so I've had to pay less attention to it. I think that's maybe one that would be on the list for the end of session that some folks are going to really want. So, sorry I don't have more for you on that.
Totally fine. Thank you. See, Ms. Kim.
Yeah, if I can just briefly add to that. So part of the origination came from northern Minnesota and Duluth, St. Louis County. Their county commissioners signed NDAs regarding a data center that is going in. So, it's not obviously originated by any of the legislators that are in that area, but seeing sort of the threat in the areas or of opportunity for data centers to come into communities and, apparently forced the county to sign an NDA over sort of not discussing the projects. So I think it's definitely one to watch, and I don't believe can you give us a sense if there's going to be conference committees this year and what we can expect from that? Because again, like I've spoken here before, it's like, nothing's on the table, but through conference committee, everything is kind of on the table, right? That's when there isn't a compromise that happens. And so leadership from caucuses come together and sort of compromise with the governor. Can you speak a little bit to like what, not necessarily what could be taken up, but just like what is the possibility of conference committee this year? And if you have a sense of how contentious the end of this year might be. It seems pretty smooth sailing right now, but knock on wood.
So to the question, will there be conference committees? I like to be optimistic, and to me a conference committee is a way of having transparency and allowing the public to participate. So I want there to be conference committees, and I'm hopeful that those sorts of things do see the light of day in a conference committee. I don't know if I'm answering the question enough.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Ms. Kim. Any final questions? We don't have to take the full time because then we can give more time to someone else. Doesn't look like it. I want to thank you again. And as Chair Johnson pointed out, please let us know how we can help you, help us in the last couple of weeks here.
Okay. Thank you very much, and thank you, Council.
Thank you. And with that, we will make not even hard, just a pivot to Ms. Bird to talk about the harm report from the Reparations Committee. Welcome up and excited to hear about this.
Great, thank you. Good morning, council members. What I want to do today is essentially provide a summary of the harm report project and the services the vendor will be providing. But just to, before that, maybe provide a little bit of a quick recap of, kind of how we got to this place. In April 23rd of last year, 2025, the Reparations Commission itself recommended that the council conduct a harm report to examine, what may be some harms the city of St. Paul may have been involved with relative to descendants of slavery. And in August of 18th, the council, through the procurement process, produced and issued an RFP in 2025, and then that RFP had closed on October 3rd in 2023. We had a number of applicants, and who arose to the top is who we have recently signed a contract with. And again, the city's objectives, as you can see from the slide of the harm report, is to develop a comprehensive evidence-based report documenting historical and ongoing harms impacting descendants of American chattel slavery and to guide equitable city-related policies and reparative action. The vendor who we selected is the African American Redress Network, ARM for short. And for the last 6 years, they've essentially led some very impactful reparative justice policies. And what they may very well be known for is in 2020, They produced a harm report study for Evanston, Illinois, that documented housing policy from 1919 to 1969, leading to the first, reparations-related program, but that clearly looked at documenting housing, redlining, discriminatory-related policies. And based on that work, it kind of set a precedence all over the country. And they have since worked with other cities like Detroit, Kansas City in 2024, and Park and Greenbelt, Maryland in 2025. And they are pretty much backed by a number of experts, as you can see within the content of the contract itself. I think their team really consists of 5 experts. Some are lawyers. Some have a lot of expertise around the matter of reparations because they've worked quite a bit with the United Nations, who themselves have been, asking the entire question of reparations for those of African descent. Now, their particular methodology to this research is looking at data collection, taking a deep dive into some histography analysis, and it's a very big term I had to wrap my head around, but that's really looking at, what is the connection of past historic injustices to contemporary, I guess you could say, inequalities, and kind of helping to draw that link. Also looking at quantitative data around housing matters, for example, around housing matters, education, healthcare, income, but looking across different sectors to see where those alignments can be met as they do that histography analysis. And then, again, taking another deep dive into archival and genealogical research to really validate that historical context that they're basing their research in. Another part of their methodology is really doing some deep community engagement, and that itself will involve oral histories, interviews, focus groups. They're also looking at, because they are, I guess you would say, more an out-of-town agency, looking at hiring a local internal research liaison who has some trust and connections within the community to kind of help bridge that gap. As well as meeting out in the public with various stakeholders and other groups who have, pretty much been on the ground working on this issue in some form or fashion. And then the final aspect of their methodology work is just connection and coordination with the government, entailing the Reparations Commission itself, doing ongoing collaboration work through that body, certainly with staff and staff and council members, and any kind of structured communication and transparency, just informing us all of what it is they're doing with their research and continuously having touch points.
Ms. Bird, just one question. Where is the AARN based out of?
They are actually working in partnership out of Columbia University. And the contract itself, as you would notice, is through Columbia University. So they're out of New York, and they have a collaboration kind of partnership where they're kind of working the back end of the contract itself. But they are based out of New York.
And thank you. And then do we know who the on-the-ground, because it seems like some of this is qualitative and quantitative research that can happen anywhere, but as you pointed out, some of it really has to be very localized. Do we either know who the liaison is, or do they intend to spend a certain amount of time here?
They do have within their contract in which they will spend some physical time here in the Twin Cities, but some aspects of the work will be through the liaison doing that groundwork. Some of the work will entail more online, connecting through Teams, for example. But there will be select times in which they will be here physically, yes.
Thank you. Other questions, Ms. Bowie?
Thank you, Council President. Thank you so much, Ms. Birch. I do have a follow-up question about that. That was, I didn't get a clear answer in the beginning of the scoping of the contract, but is there part of the $229,000 for the contract? Is it itemized for travel budget? Because I imagine that there is going to have to be some type of substantial travel. And do you know how much is itemized for the liaison? Is that part of the contract as well?
They did submit a budget in which there will be some itemized travel. I can't recall off the top of my head, that is not within this contract, but they did give us a submission or a summary of travel that would consist of their entire team. So the budget itself can't, sustain that large of a team that consists of 5 consultants to travel in on a regular basis, but they do have some select times in which they will be here.
Any other questions before we move on to the next slide? Doesn't look like it. Oh, sorry, Vice President.
Thank you. Thanks, Council President. Thank you, Veronica, for your presentation. I was just wondering, can you give us I don't believe this was covered, and so I'm curious, can you give a recap on how many contractors there were for the bid, and then were there any contractors that were local as well?
Yes, I'm trying to recall. I do believe there were maybe about 4 or 5 contractors. I'm trying to think how many were local. I think at least one, maybe 2 were local that stood out as local contractors. However, the selection committee that really kind of fell to this particular group was really impressed with the work that they did previously, for example, in Evanston, Illinois, recognizing that even some of the other vendors, themselves were looking to the initial work of this particular contractor and what they were engaged in.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Johnson.
So.
Thank you, and thank you, Veronica, for this presentation, as well as just being able to include the actual content behind their submission. I think to the pieces of the network, and kind of just to speak to the work of African American Redress Network. So a lot of the entities that applied locally, it's my understanding that they actually referenced ARN in some of the proposals. So it was either work with ARN, the entity that actually does the work, or work with the local entity who's just going to go and turn around and work with ARN. And I think one of the things that's really important about that piece is just that this is the entity that has done harm reports for previous cities, a lot of those cities in which members of our commission are in direct communication with. And so I think that this actual network too also has a pre-existing relationship with some of the commission members, to where that won't be as big of a learning curve despite being remote. With that, I think also just putting into light the resumes that are attached for Dr. Mann and for Mr. Hansford as well. I think that they were submitted in Alliance because they're the leading scholars that work with ARN. And so for the who's and I think the what of the discussions, and I think really what I hope to see is some of the next steps, noting that the contract start date, I think, is today on the timeline per slide. I think what I'm really excited about, and just kind of looking at the project timelines, right, like there's an extensive piece on this proposal, and as someone who's not on the committee, not being able to see the full scope of what the other applications were, but looking at the community engagement approach as well as just their promise on their work plan, their timeline. I think it's really getting at what some of the commissioners have also echoed that they would like, and just looking at their month 1 and 2 deliverables. I know here in St. Paul we have a specific approach, and I guess one thing I would say we should probably follow up on with them is to understand what that timeline is for that on-site person, and to know who that person is, and how they're planning to do the community engagement work, because I know that's really important to the commission. And in addition to that, one of the things that I think will be really important once we know who that person is being able to tap into like what that kickoff meeting looks like, what that, what the plans are for working alongside the members, because one, I just don't want to hear about like a community event or a community meeting happening that myself or other colleagues aren't able to weigh into or to gather people for, so I definitely want to know like when those things are happening, what the kickoff meeting really looks like. I think a lot of this communication comes back to communicating with the commission too, but I think just making sure that we are aware of what the community engagement process ends up looking like is going to be really important. So being that their first start date I think is today, my hope would be that we would hear from ARN directly about how they're going to actionalize some of their work plan. And so whatever that looks like, whether that needs to be formally requested by council members, I look to you kind of just share with us what you feel comfortable with. But I think one of the things will be really helpful to include all of us on the front end versus sharing it like a week out, oh, we're doing an event in your ward, want to hear about it. So just some of those things I think will be really important. But to ARN's credit, I mean, this is a particular type of work that needs someone who can go deeper, and whether they're based in New York, they've been at Columbia University to actually be able to do this work, and it's a specialty, and a lot rides on the product of this harm report, I think. And so it was kind of cool to see that this was the same entity that did work in Evanston, the same entity that has done work in different cities across the country related to this. But yeah, they were mentioned several times in other proposals as a partner, because it's kind of the partner you work with.
Thanks. Ms.
Yes,
Johnson.
and if I can just follow up with that, Councilmember Johnson, I think another attractive point to their proposal was really kind of their collaborative nature. And as I've been talking with the lead researcher, who's currently a professor at Columbia University, that's essentially their MO. So they really do understand that here in St. Paul, we've been very collaborative in working, across the commission itself and across, working alongside with council members, just really building consensus as much as possible on the front end. So they're very adept to that.
Great. Why don't we let you finish up this slide, and then we can kind of open it up to additional questions.
Okay, my final slide here, again, is just looking at how we're phasing the work of their scope of work. And again, phase 1 and 3 is looking at the examining harms assessment, doing that community engagement setup, some initial archival and genealogical research. The next phases 4 and 5 is that oral history and historical context. And 6 is more of the impact analysis across various sectors, in which they will work closely with the community to identify, what are the most important sectors you really think we should be examining. And then the final phase is their actual policy recommendations, their implementation plan that they would recommend to the commission and to the city council, and doing some public engagement, helping to explain their research findings more broadly out in the public. And as Councilmember Johnson alluded to, the time frame we're giving them for this work is a whole year, starting today, April 15th until April 14th of next year. And again, the contract itself is aligned with milestones, aligned with deliverables of the project. And the outcomes, the policy outcomes is again significant because it will verify historical harms and present a documentation of that and quantify disparities across these key sectors. And then more significantly, create an actionable reparative framework that's in alignment with the UN or international standards around restitution, compensation, rehabilitation, satisfaction, and guaranteed of non-repetition. So, but again, if there are any other follow-up questions, I can answer those, but we will definitely be working very closely with council members to execute this work.
Thanks for the very hard work on this, Ms. Byrd. I see Ms. Johnson has a question or a comment.
Yeah, I was just curious more so, the itemized budget, are we able to see the itemized budget? I just noticed that it's not in the application material itself.
Well, the itemized budget, let me check with procurement on that. I can get a copy of that for you. But again, the itemized budget is still a bit of an approximation, at least, how we set up the contract itself. I think it is in the contract, is they would receive a payment in incremental phases based on the milestone of the work they produce within the scope of work itself. So.
Yeah, as a brief just follow-up, I think the budget itself was submitted as a separate file to this one. So just being able to see important note, the 229,000 price point. It was a discussion at great length with the commission about whether or not they wanted to give some from the scope because the bid came back higher than what they had originally planned for that. Originally, the conversations were around $175,000, but the scope of what was accomplished in this, in the request that we put out as a city, there was more value in actually being able to do the full budgeted amount, and this was what came back in the bid. And so I think it just would be helpful for folks to understand how they broke down those costs, even if obviously their projections and not actuals, their budgeted expenses and not actuals. But I think just being able to see how ARN divvied up that versus the work itself would be helpful to get at some of the pieces around transportation, around how much they're projecting in research, around how much they're projecting for that individual partner. And I just don't see it in the information we have here. And so if it is publicly accessible in the sense that, like, I know this is now because this is the selection that we put in, but if we can get the budget that was submitted as a separate file, I think it just would answer any questions that people have about that amount. And so whatever can be shared would be great.
Yes, I could certainly follow up with that.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. I just have two comments. One, I want to really commend the team, you, Ms. Byrd, and the entire commission for the thoughtfulness of how this contract is laid out. I especially appreciate the timelines with milestones and payment tied to deliverables according to those milestones. We have seen recently with another contract that we ended up making payment without getting what we needed in that contract, and I just want to make sure that, applaud you for doing that and make sure that the commission continues to hold the contractor accountable for those deliverables before payment is made. It's very difficult on the back end to get the payment back when the work is not done. And then second of all, I really appreciate what you said, Ms. Johnson, about the experience of ARN. It seems like we've really made a great decision here. I would say that given that they've already worked with so many other cities, Evanston foremost among them probably, that have now moved towards policy based on the harm report, I think sometimes you go forward with a report, you're not exactly sure how it's going to tie into the policy you may want to pass afterward. It would be great for the commission to have a conversation, if they haven't already, with Evanston or KC or Detroit, some of these other cities, to say, what do you wish you maybe had learned from the harm report or data you wish had been in there that would have informed your policies later on that maybe we should ask for now? Because I think we have that experience we can learn from. So just a suggestion. Ms. Coleman.
Thank you. Also, just a quick comment. I'm really excited about this, and also just want to say a huge congratulations. I have been lucky enough to get to work with Professor Hansford a little bit in the past, and he's so brilliant. And the fact that St. Paul is going to get to benefit from his brain on this is such a huge win for all of us. So feel really, really excited and really optimistic about where this is going to go. So just a huge congratulations, and excited to see what comes out of all of this.
Ms. Bowie.
Thank you. And I just want to say congratulations too on the work. I know it's been a very, very tedious process, especially for a large contract of this magnitude. But I also had a chance to connect with Dr. Hansford actually 2 years ago at the United Nations Permanent Forum for People of African Descent. I actually should be there right now, but that's a whole other story. Actually, it's so fitting that our contract is starting today because they're in a group chat right now in Geneva talking about how they're going to continue on their research and expand some of their research, particularly here in the city of St. Paul. So I am happy to hear that our work is going to have national, even international attention. The first time I had a chance to connect with Mr. Hansfield was actually him giving a survey results of the Kansas City Harm Report, where they did a sustainable goals assessment or audit, and also like just looking at the city of San Francisco and connecting with the former council member, Robin, in the city of Evanston, and how that harm report actually influenced their restorative housing program, which they actually had shared that we were actually way more progressive and forward thinking with our inheritance fund, which pretty much does the same thing. I would say one of the things that I am interested in the front end with connecting with whoever that research liaison would be is for the very things that you mentioned, Council President Naker, if we can actually look at ways that we can deepen the scope. One of the things that I noticed in the scope, it looks at like health, it looks at income, and it looks at education, but it doesn't have anything in here about public safety. And when I think about in terms of harms and like historical harms and historical context for many of the activists and historians in St. Paul, it should be important that we center the people's descendants' experience with our public safety, frontliners, also the criminal justice system, as those are also factors that goes into people's experience of life.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Ms. Bowie.
Yes, if I could address that.
Yeah.
That's a very good point, Councilmember Bowie. Those are just examples that they've provided. I do believe there is, within the contract itself, the idea of public safety as well as neighborhood infrastructure and so forth and so on. So there are, a number of sectors that they are looking to discuss with the community, look at what should be prioritized, and, frame their research definitely around there. And to you, Council President, in terms of, aligning, the milestones with the payment itself, one thing, too, to help to kind of secure that is just providing more of the payment at the end, which is where, the biggest bulk of the work is in the final research product. So again, just trying to put in some safeguards. But with that, if there aren't
a follow-up from Ms. Bowie, then Ms. Jost, and then I think we'll leave it there unless there's anything burning after that.
Yeah, and I just wanted to reiterate too, because I see part of the scope is a kickoff meeting, and I know, Veronica, you've been connecting with the council members around what will be a good day. If you can just make sure that we're working ahead of time, I would love to at least plan for a kickoff that's at least a month out before we figure out the date, just so we can be able to connect with the partners. And also on the conduct oral stories and the community engagement, I also would like to lead on, particularly on like the stakeholders and just doing some work beforehand, so they're not touching the ground, doing a kickoff, and then trying to learn and like who's the who. We already have a lot of valuable connections and stakeholders that really is eager to be part of this work. So we just want to make sure we can, eliminate any, gatekeeping, I should say, around when it comes to whose stories is told and who can actually be part of the process.
Thanks, Ms. Bowie. Ms. Jost?
Thank you, Council President. I just had a quick comment similar to what the Council President said with the work that this group has done in other cities. It would also be interesting to know, and maybe, the Commission's already exploring this, but like what policies they implemented as a result of the report that they received, and just, how are any of those policies working? Just anything else we can learn. It sounds like Councilmember Bowie also has a relationship with folks in some of these cities. That would just be something I would be interested in knowing more about.
Okay, that's a very good idea, and maybe a good opportunity to invite some of those before the commission itself and hear directly from them. But I think that will kind of bring my presentation then to a close, and just to put on the council members' radar, again, I will be following up with you just in regards to orchestrating some more upcoming listening sessions. We do have one being hosted by Council President Naker coming up I think on the 27th. So I want to continue following up with you. And then finally, too, as I touch base a bit more with you one-on-one, just letting you know as well of some recommendations also coming from the commission about some policy recommendations around anti-Black hate crime resolution they're looking at moving through the city council, as well as support of a Ramsey County appropriate response related resolution. So I'll get more into that as I meet with you, but just wanted to put that on your radar.
Thank you so much, Ms. Burt. We'll let Ms. Johnson have the final word.
Sorry, but not really. I wanted to just make a recommendation to this body. I think that, one of the things I think will be helpful for us as well, and as we gather understanding, is to think about and consider bringing on or having like either a virtual presentation from some of the leaders in Evanston. I think that like just being able to continue to educate ourselves on some of the questions that we're asking here around policy. One of the distinctions in Evanston, right, is that the council member who was there also led a lot of the work as a result of this harm report. And so much of the work is directly from another local government colleague to another. And so I think sometimes also hearing about what they learn would be very beneficial to this body and to the public, right? To people who maybe aren't visiting and as in the weeds on the Reparations Commission's work, or maybe not doing it every day. We have an ability to create a public record of that as well. And so if there is any space for this, I think an appropriate place for it is the policy committee. If there are openings and if there are opportunities this year to squeeze it in, even asking for 30 minutes or so, or 45 minutes, a slot for one of the leaders or a couple leaders from respective cities who have implemented them based off of the harm report, right? I think could be worth our time and might be worth the discussion in this space, just so we can ask them directly.
Thanks, Ms. Johnson. I agree, and we definitely have room on the calendar, so we'll follow up on that. Ms. Burt, thank you so much again, and please extend our thanks to the Commission for all their hard work.
Great, thank you. Thank you for your partnership, and we're moving forward with some exciting work.
Thank you. And with that, we will pivot once again with the last 17 minutes to Mr. Greenfield, and I know our hope is to also have some time for discussion, so
Yes.
we'll do our best.
I will move rapidly here. I apologize that printed slides were not made available, but this is meant to be more of a facilitated conversation anyway.
We're trying to save trees also.
And save trees, balance it out with the other presentations. So I'm intending to serve kind of a facilitator role in this conversation, largely due to time, but also to receive direction from you as council members to explore this conversation about potential reforms to the charter. I know in my initial conversations that I've had with some of you already have ideas that you are interested in bringing forward to the Charter Commission, so this is also intended to elevate those ideas but not necessarily take a position on them, and or explore other areas of governance for potential reform as I have reviewed the charter and been in this role for a little under a year. So some very brief background that we're all familiar with. We're a home rule charter city, which is a creature of state statute. A home rule charter city can exercise powers in their charter so long as they do not conflict with state laws, and that the provisions can specifically restrict the powers of a city, which would result in voters in our city having more control over the city's governing powers. Our city charter is 57 pages covering 18 chapters. We exist within a strong mayor system, one of only 4 in the state, where the mayor is responsible to the council for the operation of all agencies and departments. The mayor can generally appoint and remove subordinates and is not a council member, but can veto council legislation and prepares and administers a budget that is subject to our approval. And the Charter Commission is a statutorily prescribed entity and governed entity. So the Charter Commission's duty is to study local charter and government. The commission is required to meet once a year. It functions in practice like a standing constitutional convention. If we think of the charter as our governing document, our constitution, this is the standing body that can propose charter changes at any time or have changes brought to them, which is part of this conversation. They can also meet upon presentation of a petition presented by at least 10% of registered voters, according to the last annual city election, or by resolution, as discussed, of majority of the city council. 2 processes by which we can amend the charter through the Charter Commission: amendment by proposal and amendment by ordinance. Amendment by proposal is the process by which a Charter Commission may propose amendments to the charter at any time, or a citizen petition can be brought forward. The amendment goes to the city clerk, who notifies the council, who then provides for the election if the proposal meets the legal requirements. That's not fully what I'm interested in discussing here. Obviously, as the policy committee, we're more interested in the ordinance route. I specify the details by which the charter is amended by ordinance. I'm not going to go progression by progression unless there's an interest in doing so. But in short, and the way I'll summarize this process is, we bring things to the Charter Commission that then sets forth a statutorily prescribed set of deadlines by which they have to review and then return the potential change to the council after that time. So either the council then decides to submit what potential amendment to the charter is made as originally proposed, or the commission's substitute amendment. This is an example of one amendment that we're very familiar with, an amendment to our charter by ordinance, establishing the process by which we impose administrative citations. So this is just an example of the way that the charter has been amended recently to provide for ordinance language that exists not just on a policy basis, but also on a governance basis, a way that we can enforce our city ordinances and recoup revenue as a penalty.
Mr. Greenfield, in your previous slide, did you say that anything that comes back then has to be submitted to the voters?
No, not necessarily. There's a pathway that I'll describe later. That things that can come back to us, we can take up, and that's what for Minnesota Statute Section 410-12, Subdivision 7 discusses. So within receiving, the Charter Commission may direct the City Council to amend the charter by ordinance, separate from a voting proposal. Within 1 month of receiving a recommendation to amend the charter by ordinance, the city must publish notice of a public hearing, hold the public hearing within at least 2 weeks, but not more than 1 month after the notice is published. And within 1 month of the public hearing, the City Council must vote on the proposal. In order for the amendment by ordinance to the charter to be effective, all 7 members have to approve the ordinance, and the mayor has to sign the ordinance and not veto it. The ordinance must be published as in the case of other ordinances and becomes effective 90 days after passage, approval, and publication unless a later date is provided. So again, this is a very high-level overview. I'm happy to go more into specific details, but what I'm intending to bring forward to this conversation, and this is the piece that allows even an enacted ordinance to be then brought to the voters for approval, like administrative citations was, within 60 days after passage and publication. So I identified in reviewing the charter, 2 large governance areas of the, where the charter and where we as council could take opportunities to explore potential changes to the charter. I kind of have them loosely organized into both executive governance areas as well as legislative governance areas. I apologize for the look of jeopardy, but that's kind of the method I'm trying to go, I think, with the remaining part of this presentation. In terms of executive governance areas of charters, I've specified and hyperlinked the ones where I feel we've seen some potential challenges, or there's ways that
we kind of have to operate within these structures in our relationship with the mayor's office. And so I'm happy to dive into, why I've identified these specifics as the possibility of, a potential charter reform or a proposal to be brought forward, or something that's worth further study. I'll note that on the right side of the slide here, we kind of are, at the top two right columns. These are the principles, I think, of the strong mayor system in action, particularly, Charter Section 3.014, where the mayor has the charter prescribed duty to direct and supervise the administration of all departments and agencies. And then, the navy blue column in the middle there talks about our appointment process, by which the mayor submits, the city attorney for approval with the advice and consent of the city council. That's something that happens at the outset of a mayor's term, but is, potentially something that we could build in additional parameters around confirmation, as we've seen from a city across the river. And then, the bottom are more, actions that the mayor's office takes as part of their authority, particularly the veto process, the process by which boards, commissions, and legislative advisory committees are established, and the baseline mayoral duty of recommending a budget for adoption by the city council. And then the latter two areas in the bottom right, the city attorney of Chapter 5 and Chapter 9 of executive departments, those two are areas where they are within the charter, but they are subject to the direction and supervision of the mayor, unless otherwise prescribed by law, specifically in Chapter 9. So this is kind of where I would say there are governance areas of the charter within the executive branch that we see a lot of interaction with. We have our policies, potentially exist within this space, but the balance and that exists between two co-equal branches is something that we can pursue through the voters or through the Charter Commission if additional clarification or need is needed. That process is still open to us through the Charter Commission to address these areas of the executive. So I'm happy to pull up any specific text off this table to dig into specifics. But I think in the interest of time, I'm just going to pivot to the legislative chart unless there are questions specifically here.
We should pivot.
Okay. The governance areas for the legislative branch that I've identified, there's a variety of different sections that I think relate to potential reforms for our legislative powers. We have the distribution of powers at the outset. We have a part-time council prescribed by charter. We have a process by which we fill vacancies on the council as prescribed by charter. And as you can see as we move through, it's a variety of organizational, procedural, and policy-making structures in place within our charter that would allow us to, that are possible pathways to explore moving forward. This is not all-encompassing, but I did note far more possible, not just technical changes to these ordinances as brought forward by staff, as a possibility, but also potential balance of power governance areas that are a little bit more weighty and substantial. And so I think with this point, I've received some input from council members about areas that they're potentially interested in here. But I'm curious as to, since we are our own body, what people are thinking about these powers that I've identified and whether they have their own thoughts or questions.
Great. Thanks so much, Mr. Greenfield. And is that the end and now it's discussion?
Functionally, and there's policy chapters of the charter, but I don't have time to discuss those.
Well, thank you. That was a lot in a little, and I look to my colleagues for discussion, questions, ideas.
I don't know where the daily double is, I'm sorry.
Looking for the daily double. I see Ms. Johnson, Ms. Bowie, and then Vice President Yang.
I will take, no, I'm kidding. One of the things that I really think that it's important to know, and this is probably not genuinely a question, it's more so just something that I think as we continue to talk about changes to the charter and or the Charter Commission and engaging the Charter Commission, it's just that, this community-led commission so often meets very few times in the year. And I think going to the Charter Commission or asking the Charter Commission or being able to have communication with the Charter Commission to do anything seems to be like this really long process, but also just there's like the inability to have, things brought to the Charter Commission that potentially could could not be approved, or even just to hear the discussion or hear what the conversation is like. And I just want to express my interest in like being able to really utilize more that ability for these community members to ask themselves the hard questions and really be able to use the full weight of their appointment. Like, I think that there's just a lot of things here, right? So looking at the governance areas and a lot of places where the charter is the governing document, and then you go into the weeds of just when was the last time these things were changed, altered, looked at, even discussed publicly, in their meetings. That would be a question, that I have of like, not to send you on a fishing expedition, but like so much of our city's history, how many times has the charter actually changed substantially, and not just like in a short word. And I think just really being able to dive into that is like a really underutilized and undertapped ability that we have here, and not we, the council, but definitely the commission and the city folks that are here that are representing us on the Charter Commission. It just feels like sometimes there's like a hesitancy to just ask the commission on certain things. And, there's been there's a lot of conversations that have happened over the last few years, but so much of the substantial changes happened many, many years ago, some before I was even born. And so being able to have a extensive conversation on all of these things, I would be curious as to just understanding like how much, how many times the Charter Commission has met over the last decade, and in what capacity have they discussed things of substance and of not. And just like, if there's interest, especially from the current commission, on like talking about some of these things. Because some of the changes, yes, there's a formalized process. It takes a lot of organizing, but I think with a lot of the other commissions that do meet a lot more frequent, it's really cool for people to dig into the charter. It's also not harmful for them to discuss things like, our strong mayoral system. It's not hard to discuss things like part-time versus full-time council. I think some of these things that really just people have hesitancy around bringing up or even just asking the question, I just think that that's an underutilized and undertapped resource that holds a lot of power. Like looking into the charter and our governing document and all the things that it covers, I just think we should be really reliant on their expertise more than we are currently.
Thanks, Ms. Johnson. Ms. Bowie.
Thank you. I just going to give a comment to it. I think just getting my initial reaction is just I would love to continue on these conversations in the org committee meeting, because it just like each topic or each section you could dive into. And I think over the past 2 years or even more than that, there's been conversations amongst council members around some of these reforms. So I'm happy to listen to see what rises to the surface, but I did want to just share. I do think there should be a robust conversation, maybe, if now or even in the org meeting, around the interpretation of the charter, because I do think like there's a lot of things that is up for interpretation. I know we've been using the phrase for St. Paul that we're a strong mayor city, but when you think about like who actually adopts the budget and who actually has like adoption power, like I kind of see it, my interpretation would be like we are actually a strong council in Mayor City that the mayor proposes, but the council has the power and authority to actually adopt, which has there's an interchangeable discussion around who actually has power and what does that mean in authority. And so I do think that conversation is important because that actually helps influence how we actualize our power and also dig deep into what are all the different tools that we have to actually advance the policies that we want to see, or even advance even the budget process, which we have already brought some changes in terms of, the mayor doesn't set the trajectory around when we can start discussing budget. Council has that power, and we've utilized those tools. So I do think this is like really good refresher to really dive deep into what our powers are, but I don't really have, I don't have like a strong sense or reaction to reform I would want to see right now.
Thanks, Ms. Bowie. And I will say, as usual, I think we've been enough more than we can chew with timing.
Yeah.
But I think the purpose of this was to be very much a high-level, general table setting, if we will, and to give some of these ideas. And then I think we will likely want to come back, to your point, to have further conversation. And I think some folks at the table have specific proposals. But I also appreciate your point that it is actually a strong mayor-council system is the name. But sometimes it's always abbreviated to strong mayor. I'm not sure why. So I appreciate that point. Vice President Yang, and then I saw Ms. Jost, and I think Ms. Coleman.
Thanks, Council President. I will make mine quick. I really appreciate you, Tim, and also you, Jay, for all of your work and really digging into this topic. And Tim, you for doing the presentation here. To me, this is a very timely topic for the council to be having for many reasons that I care deeply about. And I'll just name that for me, Operation Metro Surge just really elevated the importance of us going back and reevaluating and also figuring out how we can revise our rules here to actually work for us in our community so that we can do the work that we want to for our residents. One of the two of the things that I wanted to bring up regarding that is I know that we, like at the table here, I brought up the question about when we approve ordinances, do we necessarily need to have the 30 days to go into effect in order to pass in order for a new policy to go into effect? And I am very opposed to keeping the language as it is because I know that there definitely are policies that we want to go into effect immediately. Like for example, when we wanted to ban ICE from our city-owned lots and city properties, and so that's one that I am very interested in looking into. And then also, I recently learned that in Minneapolis they have a different route that they can go in passing their ordinances on a quicker timeline. If there's unanimous support from their entire council, they don't need to go through their regular route where I think maybe it might be 3 readings. It could they can shorten it and also still do public hearing at the same time. And so I don't have the details for that. I'm going to have to look into it some more. But it was really interesting. Council Member Kim and I, we learned about that during Operation Metro Surge. And so for me, I'm interested in us having an alternative option like that available, especially for situations where it is a crisis that we are living in. And I've been through 2 of them already, pandemic, Operation Metro Surge, and I hope that we don't have another one, coming up. And so the last thing I'll mention is that for 5 years, I've always had annual conversations with my colleagues at the table about the council members going full-time and also getting a salary adjustment that really is, that matches the amount of work that we're putting into our role as council members, and also is dignified pay for us too. We are always fighting for workers and our staff to have dignified pay, and I just want to name that for us as council members, this is definitely not a part-time position. I see so many of us here doing work that is very similar to other local governments, like our Minneapolis council members, and also Ramsey County commissioners who are doing full-time jobs, also getting much more pay than we are, and we're all representing very large populations and doing a lot of important work for our city. And so in Minneapolis, every time they have a new election cycle, then they do a study for elected officials' compensations to make sure that they're always keeping up to pace with it. And I think that that's something we should definitely do here in St. Paul. I don't know the last time ever that a study was done, not only for council members, but also for the mayor too. And so that's something I wanted to bring up. So those are the changes that I would really love to dig into. I also want to name that one of the reasons why the Charter Commission doesn't meet a lot is because, I just remember a few years back, they mentioned they only want to meet whenever there is an item that council members have unanimous support on, because whenever we make our final vote, or take a final vote, we have to have unanimous support in order to amend the charter. And so the biggest issue that's been before them has been around administrative citations. And I don't recall how many meetings they've had during my 7 years here on the council. However, I do think it's really important for us to at least have a pod within the council here that's always regularly talking about the charter and how we will want to modernize, and also just make sure we're amending our rules to make it work for us, and so we can better function in the city here.
Thanks, Vice President. I think we'll go to Ms. Jost, Ms. Coleman, and then we may try to wrap there, given that we're definitely going to have follow-ups on a number of these. And thank you for bringing up some very specific suggestions and for your leadership on some of these issues for a very long time. Ms. Jost.
Thank you, Council President. I just had, a couple quick comments. Mr. Greenfield, thank you for putting this together. I find it very easy to follow, and just the way that you outlined the charter and how it works is super helpful. So thank you for doing that. I also just wanted to add, I think most of you know this, but there's new Charter Commission members that were appointed last year. I'm trying to, mixing my years up. So I just wanted to point that out too, as we're thinking about, how they work. And to your point, Council Vice President Yang, that is my understanding too, that they like to meet when something is before them that has council support. My understanding is there was some frustration under the commission where there were times where they thought there was full council support and then there wasn't, and they want to make sure they're being most efficient and making the best use of their time too.
Thank you. Yeah, helpful, very helpful context. Ms. Coleman.
I'll say this super quickly. I'll echo the thanks and then just say that, we're 50 years in, I think, to our strong mayor-council system. And so thinking about opportunities to, I could totally imagine taking a piecemeal approach, sort of, thought here, thought there, going forward. But I could also, it seems to me that there would be a lot of benefit in looking at people who have maybe modernized or updated a charter in the last 50 years and sort of doing some best practice investigation. I would imagine that Minneapolis did a lot of this when they made their transition in 21. So maybe we can crib from some of their stuff. But I would just be very, very curious what cities who have made significant charter changes or adopted a charter in the last 20 years, what they have looked like and where there are differences and what we may be able to learn from them.
Thanks, Ms. Coleman. 50 years is even before I was born, and I almost never had the chance to say that at this table. So I thought I should take advantage.
Yeah.
Mr. Greenfield, any closing thoughts?
These are my
or next steps?
Next steps would just be where we can take direction. Either we can get direction from you as council president or as a collective to study certain areas of the charter, suggest potential changes either as standalone items or, as Councilmember Coleman was talking about, a broader, holistic look. We could take direction to do more of a historical analysis. I'm happy to take that on. I'm eager just as much as, all 7 of you are to explore these governance issues. I think I'm meeting the friction between principle and policy and practice, I think, quite often, and the charter is a great place to start for resolving some of those frustrations that seem to bubble up to the surface time and time again. And the other route that we could take is elevate a potential proposal within this space, as policy committee. We still have opening dates, throughout the summer and into the fall where we could, potentially devote 60 minutes of time on 1 or 2 sets of proposals. And I think also part of this conversation, some of these will have budget implications, potentially a compensation study, that type of thing. So we can sequence, a future charter conversation around a broader holistic or strategic package, on actions that we're taking as council.
Great. Thank you for these very clear breakdown, as Ms. Jo said, and also clear next steps. And I think I would say to my colleagues, as you reflect on this, talk to me, talk to Mr. Greenfield, especially if you have specific ideas that we want to get on the policy committee calendar or specific items to study. We do still have a number of open spots, and we want to make sure we're making the most of it. With that, thanks everyone for your patience. Sorry to go over again, and we are adjourned. Sorry that was so loud.